to this evening's social host liability presentation. I'm sure everyone is thrilled to be here on a beautiful spring evening. I certainly get it that some families are concerned that they have to attend this. We have not done the social host liability presentation for about 5 years, and there have been incidents that have occurred over that time where administration in the school thought it was necessary and important for us to provide this forum again. When you provide it for the parents, the question is always, why aren't you doing something for the students? And when you do something only for the students, the question is, shouldn't we be getting this word out to families? So it's kind of a tricky place to be. We're starting this year with families, hoping that this important message gets through and it gives you some support when your adolescents are asking you to do things to help celebrate end of the year activities, prom and ball, that may run contrary to what you would want to do. So I appreciate you being here. We are very appreciative of Assistant District Attorney for being here this evening, who will run the majority of the program. We're also appreciative that Chief of Police Bill Pittman is here with us, who will conclude the program. The process is, when you came into the auditorium, you should have made sure to have your son or daughter's name highlighted. When the presentation is over, you will go back to where you checked in and you will get that certificate, and that will enable your youngster to buy a ticket to prom or senior ball. To make this one-stop shopping, we are actually going to have prom tickets available for sale this evening. So you can pick up your certificate, walk down to another table, and go ahead and buy your prom ticket. So thank you for being here, and I will turn it over to ADA Dan Higgins. Thank you.
Thank you, Principal Bucky. Ladies and gentlemen, so I understand this is a mandatory thing for the parents at the school to attend. I'll try to keep it somewhat short. Mainly, our main goal here is to just inform you of all the penalties that students could face and parents could face. So I'm sorry, I'll take that as the first question. Maybe we can move this up a little. Essentially, our job here is to let you know of the penalties you'll face and the students will face as well if they're caught with alcohol-related offenses here. There's probably a question in parents' mind, what's the safest option for students here after prom? Should we have them at our house, et cetera? There's probably some pressure maybe to be the cool parents, et cetera. There's a lot of penalties that can go with this and a lot of tragedies that we see in our line of work, and Chief Pittman will talk about that as well. We regularly prosecute motor vehicle homicides and OUI drunk driving cases, and each of these situations is certainly preventable if the person who caused that situation had just curbed their behavior. As everyone knows, you have to be 21 or over in order to consume alcohol, have alcohol in your person. These students, if they're transporting alcohol, can find themselves subject to fines and arrest. If they're drinking and then they drive away from your home or some other parent's home, can find themselves in an OUI drunk driving type arrest. If they are 18 as seniors, 18 or over, we're not talking about a juvenile record anymore. We're talking about an adult record, district court, and that has permanent consequences for them and their future. One, they have to disclose that on job applications when asked, college applications when asked. If they were to get another drunk driving in their lifetime, they'd face enhanced penalties. Additionally, insurance premiums, and for you parents who live with the students in your home, could also mean your family insurance premiums go up, and that's for a significant amount of time, as I'm sure we're all aware, with insurance companies and the state law. We can go over the slide here a little bit. Obviously, the first thing up here is providing alcohol to persons under 21. There is a jail option with that. There is also a fine option. I think Chief Pittman will probably discuss this with you if the police have to respond and there's students intoxicated and they find out it's being provided by parents at a central source here at a party. That will become a problem for both that social host, that parent, as well as potentially those students. There's other consequences that can flow from here as well if they're caught with the alcohol in their possession, if a parent is providing it, and if they drive away from that party and are stopped on the road. But we've already mentioned the OUI consequences that can come from that. If we can flick through here, Deb. So I think some of these things are obvious. The students could end up with an arrest record. They could end up with a CORI, we call a court activity record, or a CARI, if they are brought into court and charged with that crime, which they would be after an arrest. School suspension is obvious. I'm sure the principal can talk about that. And this is the year, I'm sure a lot of these students senior year are looking to graduate. Obviously, that could be an issue. Civil liability, this could mean for both the student and the parent. The parent, if hosting a party where they're found to be drinking at, even if it's not your child, some other child that drives away. Another practical concern here is some parents think that they can take keys away and then these students could safely drink. They're at my house, they're safe. Students that age who drink don't always make sound decisions. They'll find their keys, they'll leave your house. You're not protected from civil liability if they leave, even without you knowing. That civil liability can mean homeowners' claims, lawsuits. We, the district attorney's office, are not involved in that, but that's something that I think everyone should be knowledgeable about. I'm sure you all already know that. Injury, addiction, death. We see motor vehicle homicides every year on Cape Cod and on both islands. It is a sad event, and it's one that involves the court process if certain factors are there. That's something that obviously everyone here would like to prevent and keep the students safe. If we go to the next. And we can just go over these briefly. These are just past incidents in other areas. It's just to let you know that there is a reality to police responding. There's a reality to students being arrested for certain offenses. It could be disorderly. They could be put in protective custody if they're not found to have committed a crime, but they're too unsafe to get back to their house. It's obviously an embarrassing situation, one that could affect their college applications as well if they have to discuss that. We can keep going through here. This is, I've already discussed, if they're found in a motor vehicle transporting alcohol, there are fines that can go along with that. It's also arrestable. They could end up with an arrest record if a police officer pulls them over. This speaks for itself in the cases we deal with and the results that come from these situations of underage people drinking and not knowing when they need to stop consuming and when not to drive. Driving under the influence of alcohol, just briefly, everyone's probably heard of Melanie's Law. Penalties go up with the more incidents that you are charged with or convicted of, I should say. For an OUI first, the average situation that comes out of that, if there's no extenuating circumstances, is often at least a year of probation, often at least $2,000 in fines and fees, an increase in insurance that goes with that, 24D mandated alcohol program course if they don't want to do the other mandatory sentence, which most people ask for, that 24D program. The penalties can increase from there if it's a more significant situation, one involving an accident or any types of injuries would certainly change that situation. Penalties would go up, most likely. These are all obviously things we all know about. Operating to endanger a negligent operation, that can often go along with an OUI situation. Mark lanes and speeding, civil violations, but ones that do, they are moving violations for your insurance purposes. They are citations for your students' purposes if they're pulled over for this, and it can cost them money. A lot of these things that we don't need to necessarily tell you to predict. There are a lot of unfortunate situations that can come from overconsumption of alcohol. As adults, we all know that. These are students who have less life experience here and may not know how much they can even handle, et cetera. They shouldn't be consuming alcohol at all. We can find some sexual cases that are connected with these events. We can also find motor vehicle homicides and OUI cases that are connected with these events. I think we can all understand that ourselves. The goal here is really to have the parents informed of the penalties, that they are real. The chance of an arrest is real. The prosecution in court, if arrested, is real. The insurance penalties after that are real. The potential for a student being on probation or a parent in the case of providing alcohol to the people under 21. These are all real situations, and the dangers that come with this of tragedies are also something we're trying to prevent here, and I think we're all on the same page, I'm sure. All right. Does anyone have questions about the general topics I've discussed up until this point? About how the district attorney's office handles these situations, et cetera? No? Okay. I'll turn it over to Chief Pittman now. Thank you very much.
The only thing that worries me is I'm looking out in the audience and we all have a kid the same age. And I'm thinking, what kind of example did we set over the last 17 years? So that is intended to be funny, but in a sense, it's really not. Because what we experience from the PD side is the after effects of the good times. And, you know, over the years, the prom parties and the senior ball, and there's been, you know, different efforts to have private parties, to have safe parties. But in spite of all those efforts, there's still this effort by the students to, you know, have their party that they plan, they do, and go to. And it, most of the time, turns out okay. And the police department has no problem with the concept of youth getting together and having a party, a beach party or a party in the moors or a party wherever they have it. What we do have a problem is when bad decisions are made in conjunction with that, because we cannot turn our backs on the bad decision making that we see. As an example, if an individual is at one of these parties and we're there for whatever reason, and the reasons vary, I can honestly tell you we're not out searching for the parties. We don't have to. If they have a bonfire going, somebody calls that in and reports it because they see it. If they're at a home, a neighbor, and cars start building up, a neighbor generally lets us know. What we see, and what I caution you, especially if you are an individual that has caretaking responsibilities for other properties, make sure that that property that you're caretaking doesn't become the site of this after-party site for the junior prom coming up. That is where we tend to see the worst problems that manifest themselves from these events. And as you can understand, it begins a problem because they're trespassing anyway, and then alcohol gets brought into it, and then bad decision making, and then it just transpires from there. But if you are a parent that are hosting a gathering, a get-together, just remember that if alcohol's involved, you have an affirmative responsibility to, if somebody brings alcohol to the party, to turn them away and prohibit that. You are the one that's liable. It's your property. It's your responsibility. Different challenges come up when these parties are held. And one of my biggest fears is that an individual is going to go to one of these parties in the moors, for instance, and they're going to have too much to drink. They're going to get in a little argument or dispute with one of their friends, and they're going to walk off. And there's a lot of marshy areas out there in the moors. You know, I think it was in Massachusetts where there was actually a case where a teenager actually walked into a swampy area and died, drowned, following one of these parties. And the location or the jurisdiction actually held the property owner responsible that hosted the party that night, even though the death and the incident occurred off their property, because it had started at their property. So, you know, we don't want to have that kind of tragedy. Motor vehicle wise, I'm happy to say, Nantucket, what we see here is very responsible decisions being made by most of our students in high school age. And by that, I mean, I'm not saying we haven't found alcohol in cars, but we rarely, and I can't even think of the last one, where the person operating the vehicle has actually been consuming alcohol. So they're using the dedicated driver concept, which is good. But on the other hand, When the other 3 passengers in the car are 17 years old and they're drunk, that is a different problem, albeit one that's we're happier to deal with than having somebody that's drunk operating the vehicle. Our policy for the police department is, and I got to say, we can't, it's not 100% because it's just impossible sometimes. Some of these parties you'll have 100 kids at, and I have 3 officers working the street at night. And so while they're dealing with the party, there's other things going on in the community. Sometimes I have 4, sometimes 5, but generally no more than 5 on a good night. And so what our policy is if we stop a vehicle and people in it have been consuming alcohol and they're underage, our first option is to call the parent and have the parent come and pick them up. We don't deliver them. If we're going to drive them somewhere, it's going to be either to the, most likely to the hospital or to the station. But we will ask you to come out, and our preference is for you to come out to the party scene so that you can see what was going on for yourself. It really takes away a lot of the mystery of the stories, that excuses that come up afterwards when people can actually see the site. So we would rather the parent come out. Now, I said it's not 100%. Sometimes we're just overwhelmed and we send them. If a parent comes out, we might send 3 kids with that one parent, that kind of thing. What we prefer is that we don't make an arrest. What we prefer is to work with the school system. It's a school event, although it's not sanctioned by the school. It's connected to the school activities. We prefer to let the school take care of the problem in the way that works best for them. And I know one thing that the school does is they have an absolute 0 tolerance for alcohol abuse by students, for instance, students who are athletes. The MIA rules look very down on that. And so what we do is after an event happens, whether it's after prom party or whether it's just a party on the weekend, that we find a house where a bunch of them gathered and it got brought to our attention, and for some reason we were called there. And generally we're called there because there's a problem. We take that report then and we forward that report to the school resource officer, who then works with the school on the ultimate resolution of what they're going to do with it. It's only when those efforts are resisted or there's something more serious occurs, like somebody's injured, major property damage occurs, that we would then work with the DA's office to seek alternative remedies for this. And another problem we have seen, and I think we all know our kids very well, but it's not always our kids who are at these parties. You know, we're starting in the season now where college kids are starting to return. Some of them, they return all the way back into the culture in Nantucket, and they want to, go out and resume where they left off, 1, 2, 3, 4 years ago. So they show up at some of these parties. Some of these kids graduated high school and never went to college, but they stayed here. They still come and get involved in some of these. And it's not something, I know it's not something that the students themselves welcome, but they're kind of powerless to deal with it. And so they just kind of endure it. So as a parent, if you're aware of that, and you have an older kid who might be tempted to do that, tell them it's just not cool. It makes a whole different scenario for us to have to deal with when we're dealing with somebody who oftentimes is of age. And what they don't realize, and I don't know if this theory's ever been proven, but maybe Mr. Higgins can answer the question better, but I wouldn't want to be a 21-year-old at a party full of 17-year-olds if it got busted. Because guess who's going to be in trouble? It's going to be the 21-year-old. So, we take the drinking seriously. We live in a community where alcohol is part of the culture. As much as some people have been trying to change that, I've been trying to modify it in some respects. It is what it is. It's, we're a tourist-based economy with a lot of restaurants, a lot of bars, a lot of things like that. Matter of fact, a lot of people don't realize it. We have almost 100 liquor licenses in Nantucket, and you have to take Boston out of the equation. From what I'm told, if you take Boston out of the equation, you have to take 5 other towns combined to equal that number of liquor licenses, and that's in the areas that have a lot of licenses. Most of them have half a dozen to a dozen, that kind of thing. So it presents a lot of challenges for us who are raising kids here and trying to give them the right, lead by example and set the right message. And I think for the most part, I think most of our kids have done very well with that. So that's the perception the police department has about this. Like I said, our number one goal is to work with the school to resolve these issues. The school's been very, very diligent about following up when we have made them aware of problems. And be honest with you, if they're aware of a problem that they can't deal with, they've been very diligent about getting a hold of us to try to head something off before it becomes a bigger issue. So do you have any questions for any of us about this? Now, last year, I don't think it was 5 years ago, but the last one, there was a bunch of questions. So I must have said everything this time. But, the key is just have that talk with your kids before that night, before the party. And, and always tell them if they're concerned, if they have an issue, do not be afraid to call you to come and get them. And believe me, if the police are there, we will do everything we can to help you accomplish your mission of getting your child and getting them home. That's our goal. We don't want to create any problems. And I'm going to knock on wood here, but one thing we've been very lucky here. I saw that picture of that Jeep in that presentation, and we have, as we know, and at the PD we talk about this all the time, how we're so lucky we have not had any very serious accidents. We have a couple a year, but usually not involving kids. Usually tourists and 10 people in a Jeep, that kind of thing. But we've just been lucky. It's just a matter of time before somebody flips one of those vehicles. We've had some rollovers, but because of the brush on the sides of the roads, they tend to act like cushions rather than, sudden stops. But we've just been lucky, and that luck will run out. And so we all need to have that conversation to reinforce that message that call us, and I mean you, or us as a parent, if they find themselves in a position where the person they're riding with or they themselves are unable to drive or shouldn't be driving because they've been drinking. We would rather that you dealt with that as a parent than we have to deal with it as investigating an accident or making an arrest on the juvenile. Any other questions? Dan, you did a good job. Okay. John?
I appreciate the chief's concluding remarks because often when a tragedy occurs in a community, one of the first things that people ask is, why didn't the school do something to educate students? Why didn't the school do something to educate families? And as much as some of you may not have wanted to be here this evening, I appreciate you being here, and I hope you leave with good, valuable, and useful information. And now you can go get that coveted certificate and buy your prom tickets. Thank you for attending.